I'd like to welcome you to the Tent of Many Voices. I'd also like to introduce to you our first speaker for the day. Mr. Alan Pinkham of the Nez Perce tribe is going to be speaking, and what he's going to be doing is giving you the story of how the exhausted and starving Corps of Discovery was hospitably received by the Nez Perce people. He'll present aspects of traditional tribal history and culture before and since the Corps of Discovery. And now, I ask you to join me in welcoming Alan Pinkham as he adds his voice and his stories to our tent of many voices.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Came all the way from the Idaho a few days ago. And it's about 45, 46 degrees in Idaho, and we're freezing our tail off over here. But that's fine. Winter in Idaho is just coming late, so. One of the things that I like to do is let people know what the Nez Perce knew before Lewis and Clark came to our country in Idaho. People think sometimes that history starts in 1805 for the Nez Perce people, and that's not so. We have been in Idaho since time immemorial, way before even tribal memory goes. But our tribal memory tells us that we were always in Idaho. We were created right along the Clearwater River and the Snake River and the Salmon River and the upper reaches of the Columbia River and the Columbia River Basin. So that's where we've always been. We never came from anywhere else. And I don't believe what an archaeologist will tell me that I came across the Bering Straits. That is not true, because none of our stories ever tell us that. So when we seen a strange kind of creature that didn't look like us, we wondered if they were even human beings. They had eyes like fish. Some of them had their faces upside down. They spoke a language we never heard before, and they smelled. So when we seen these creatures, our old people would say, now the prophecy is coming true, because we foretold of these strange kind of people coming. And they're very short, but they tell me quite a bit. When these people come among us, after we decided they were human beings of some sort, when they come among us, they're going to travel faster and faster and faster. They're going to make things that go through the air. They're going to make things that crawl upon the ground. And they're going to bring good things and bad things with them. The prophecy goes on, but briefly, that's what it is. Another one is a white-faced creature will be coming behind a white-faced animal about the size of a deer, and it will go right through Lapwai Valley in the center of our country. And that also happened. So when Lewis and Clark came, it surprised us that they showed up on that particular day in September, because nobody travels through the passes at that time of year, because you can get snowed in and lost up in the mountains if you do that. So we were kind of surprised that they would be doing those things. But we encountered them. But we knew of these people even before that. There's terms that we used even before we actually seen Lewis and Clark. And some of them became a very common usage among us later. But if you could imagine going back another 100 years prior to 1805, we acquired the horse about 1700. Other anthropologists and historians tell us that we got it about 1730, but I believe it's much sooner than that. Because once the Pueblo revolt occurred in about 1680, the horse trading and travel route between tribes was very fast, very quick. So within a decade or two, they would have been into the northern plains and into Idaho. Or they may have come from the southern Idaho up into our country. So either way, we would have acquired the horse about 1700. And if we had seen a new animal that we never seen before, what kinds of questions do you think we would ask? What do you use this animal for? Where did it come from? Who brought it? How do you use it? How do you train it? What do you call it? We call the horse Pinkham. That's our term. And it's related very close to the dog because we already had the dog. The dog we call Chikamko. And it's just a shortened version of that, and is Pinkham, and that's what we call the horse. And so we acquired the horse, we adapted to that horse culture very quickly, and within 100 years, we had vast herds of horses before Lewis and Clark came among us. So this tells me that we knew quite a bit about these white-faced creatures. They called themselves white, and we didn't know why, but that's what they did. And so I'm sure that we knew about this, and then what we end up calling these white-faced creatures were Soyapo. And the Salish people call them Soyapi. And so that tells me quite a bit that, and the translation of Soyapo means across water people. So how did we know they came across the water? So he must have known a great deal about these white-faced creatures. And so when Lewis and Clark shows up, you know, we knew they were coming because it was foretold that they would come and that they would bring good things and bad things, harmful things that would hurt us and good things that would help us. So it was a dichotomy of, or a very polarized opinion of these people once we decided they were human beings. And knowing what they had is what we wanted. They had gunpowder, lead, metal, glass, tools that we could use. So when Watkueis, the old lady that was stolen by another tribe out on a plain, she made her way back home, and she was along the Clearwater River when she heard of Lewis and Clark coming. And so there was a great discussion. What should we do with these people? Should we let them pass through our country, or should we kill them, or should we, you know, we can utilize what they have. You know, Lewis and Clark had the most modern rifled muzzleloaders of that day. Very accurate firearms. And some of the knives and other tools they had were very useful to us. So if we would have decided to kill them, we would have ended up with these good items. But Watkueis, the way the name Watkueis means that someone that has been taken away then came back to the country. That's what that means. And at this time in 1805, she was an elderly lady, and she was very ill at the time. And the story goes that she was lying in a tent, and she asked someone to raise up the flap so she could view these people. And she's seen them and says, "Oh, those are the people that helped me out on the plains when I was coming home. You know, don't hurt them, don't do them any harm." So she swayed the argument for not killing these people. And we debate that issue of whether is that a good thing or a bad thing if you let them live. So, and we're still debating it sometimes also, but nonetheless, we are here. We survived that. And so, Watkueis was very influential in what occurred. And so the decision was made, let's help these people, knowing what they're going to do, knowing what they're going to bring to us in the following years. And also that prophecy comes true also. And part of the prophecy says that it will take 5 generations for the Nez Perce people to recover from the coming of the white man. That is what is foretold. And so, knowing this, and there's other members of our tribe, the tribal leaders, Broken Arm and a few others, but there was a man that was more influential than any other Nez Perce leader. His name was Hachatz El Pil. And what Hachatz El Pil means is red bear or bloody bear. And at the time of 1806, when Lewis and Clark were coming back upriver, Red Bear met them. He wasn't there, I don't believe, in 1805 when they went downriver, but he was there when they came back upriver. Now, Red Bear, he was about 53 years old in 1806. And he also had a kind of a vision. He said, I must smoke with these people when they come. Even before Lewis and Clark showed up in the country. This is what he said. I need to smoke with these people. So there again, here is another interpretation of the encounter or the contact with Lewis and Clark. So that's what he did. He smoked with them. And making that decision that it's best to smoke with them rather than go into conflict with them immediately. Now, Red Bear was born about 1752. And when he passed away, he was 90 years old. And he had 80 wounds on his body with encounters while hunting or encounters when he was in battle. He later adopted the name Many Wounds when he became older. He had 6 sons. There was a Red Bear Jr., then there were 2 Black Eagles. The second son was named Black Eagle, and he was killed by Shoshone Bannock people. And then the son, Red Bear Jr., signed the 1855 treaty that we made with the United States government in Walla Walla. And there was 2 other sons that had Salish names, and they became very prominent leaders among the tribe also. But there's another son. His name was Blacktail Eagle. And he is the one that I surmised, and with the things that I found out, that he probably went to St. Louis in 1831 with 3 other Nez Perce. Now, whether this Black Eagle was born in 1806, I'm not sure. But he must have been influenced by his father, Old Red Bear, that there are certain things that we need to do as tribal people. And that is to find out, how do the minds of these strange creatures work? How do they do these things that they do? And one of those things that they do is they write. They go like this. And then they can hand that, what they have written, to someone else, and they can read that word for word. And we wondered, how do they do that? And this is one of the things that our old people would talk about. We need to know how they do this. Now, one of the things that used to occur in these days, that we would exchange children with other tribes and make arranged marriages between tribal leaders. Well, this also occurred with Lewis and Clark. Red Bear's daughter had the son of Clark. And that was done for a purpose, because this is the alliance. This is how we make relationships between another tribe or another kind of people. The Corps of Discovery didn't think this was occurring. They were just out there enjoying themselves with the young women. But we were forming an alliance. People forget this. And so Clark has a son. And I'm a descendant of Red Bear. My mother is a Black Eagle. The Black Eagle name comes through the Red Bear family. So if there's Clarks out there, we're related some way. And I have met a couple of these Clark people. So there's this tie. And it's ironic now that I can meet someone that we have in common ancestry. People don't think of these things that way, but this is what it was done 200 years ago to form this alliance. So it's very important. But then historians have ignored this fact that this alliance was formed. So, when Black Eagle went to St. Louis, he said, they made the sign, the book. How do you write? Well, the missionaries misinterpreted that and said, oh, they must be looking for the Bible. Their souls are thirsting for religious teachings. Well, that may have been true to a certain extent, but that was not the main purpose. The main purpose was, how do you transfer knowledge so you can make things that you need, or you make your life a little bit easier. That's what we're really after. But missionaries misinterpreted that, so we got inundated by missionaries. Presbyterians, the Catholics, the Methodists, all came out to our country. Which is good, which is bad also. The missionaries told us, don't practice your heathen ways. You're not going to go to heaven if you practice your heathen ways. You'll go to hell if you practice your heathen ways. That's what we were told. Ignoring the alliance that we had set up. So now, the Nez Perce people are in a dilemma. We see things disappearing. Our land base, our animals, our fish, our water. Those are being occupied by this half-human creature that came to us. I'm sorry I have to express myself this way, but we also had our own prejudices and biases also. But this is the way our old people talk. And so, even though we had a treaty of 1855, which Red Bear Jr. signed, and there again the alliance is ignored. Clark's son was at the treaty negotiations in Walla Walla, but he was ignored. And then when it became the War of 1877, he was also ignored as well. But Clark's son went with Joseph and Soot and Whitebird and the other leaders. And he went through all the battles. The Battle of Whitebird, the Battle of Clearwater, Fort Fizzle, Big Hole, Canyon Creek, and Bear's Paw. He went through all those battles. Clark's son. Clark's son was called Halachtuket, and that means daytime smoker. And this is what we call Clark in 1806. We called him Halachtuket, daytime smoker, because that's what he probably did. He'd smoke during the daytime. So, this is a little history. Now, this is the tie that I'm describing of Lewis and Clark and those things that we wanted to do. Okay, Clark's son went through the War of 1870, and also another descendant of Red Bear. His name was Watola, and he lived to be 106 years old. He met Spalding. He was also the one that grabbed Lieutenant Jerome's horse at the Battle of Bear's Paw when Joseph was taken prisoner. Watola held the horse of Lieutenant Jerome, and so they took Jerome back to the Nez Perce camp and kept him prisoner until Joseph was released. And he is a great-grandson of Red Bear. And the ironic thing here is the son of Watolan became the interpreter called Sam Lot in English, and he being the son of Watolan, he never fought in the Nez Perce War. He was an interpreter after the war. So these things are very ironic that, you know, some of these things occurred the way they did. When we went to war, it just split families right down the middle. Some fought with Joseph, some didn't. They stayed on a reservation. And also another son of Watolan, he fought in the War of 1870, and he was exiled into Canada. And this is all my family history. This is from my mother's side. My father's side is another part of this history as well, because on my father's side, my grandfather fought and participated in the War of 1877 also. So I'm connected from both sides into this conflict after Lewis and Clark. Now, one of the things that we made an agreement with Lewis and Clark, you know, after we took care of their horses and helped them make the canoes at Orofino, fed them, and took guides down with them to near Celilo Falls, Oregon, we made an agreement with him. When they came back in '06, besides an alliance agreement that we tried to do, they also gave us these things, these medals that on one side says peace and friendship and has a bust of Jefferson on the other side. And that was a practice of the United States at the time, to give out medals to tribes as well as other leaders of other countries. But they also did this with tribes as well. And Lewis and Clark brought out many of these medals. Now the Nez Perce received 7 or 8 medals. And since we sat down with them in Kamiah for about a month, there was a lot of discussion on what we should do with these people, as well, how do we make the relationship work? Well, one of the agreement is that if you're going to give us this medal that says peace and friendship on it, and you want us to be that way, then you treat us the same way. That was the agreement. This is the first treaty between the United States and the Nez Perce people. Well, when treaty time came and when the War of 1877 came, that was ignored. So even though we made these kinds of agreements, the United States ignore these things because it's not written down. You know, all bets are off. Well, to us, that was a sealed and agreed to agreement, and it's ignored. And that peace and friendship agreement didn't last very long, because in about 1811, when the traders and trappers came out, it was mainly a trader, they hung up Palouse Indian. Palouse Indians were as much Nez Perce as anything else also. And this is one of the conflicts. The trader came in at the mouth of Palouse River. I think it came south from Canada. And it might have been Reed or Thompson or Mackenzie, I don't know which one it was. Someone told me it was probably Reed that did this. They came and they had pack animals with them, and they met with the Indians that lived at the mouth of Palouse River, and they took their packs out and they spread everything out on the ground. And they started bragging. Now this is the tribal perspective of what this event was. So they laid it all down, you know, and they said, oh, this is what we have here, you know. If you bring us certain things, we'll trade with you. You know, this is a silver goblet, this is silverware, these are knives, these are axes, you know, those kinds of things. There were things that we could utilize, but then when they didn't get any trade, then they folded everything, packed it up, and they says, we're going to leave. But they missed one item. An Indian had taken something, and they missed it. And they said, well, if you don't give it back to us, you know, we're going to kill one of you or hang you, because they never got it back after they questioned the Indians for quite a while. So they said, well, we're not getting it back, so we'll hang one of you, and we'll choose one of you and do that. So they erected a tripod and had a rope on it. And unfortunately, they had the rifles to intimidate us at that time. And we didn't have that many rifles among us. Now, this is 1811. So they chose one, says, you're going to be the one, so they hung him. So this agreement, this alliance that we tried to set up did not work. Because all white men are not the same. And that's another prophecy that we foretold, is that these white brothers will fight each other at different times. And how did we know that? You know, these are little bits and pieces of information I hear from my father and other elders, you know, since this event 200 years ago. So the Palouse Indian was hung. I think it was a silver goblet or something like that. And so our agreement wasn't working. And the other side of this is, when we bring things into a camp and we spread it out on the ground, we give them away. See, this is a difference in our culture now. So this provides a good opportunity for conflict. And the other aspect of this is, when another group of people come through our country, you know, what are you going to give us for coming through our country? You know, then they view this as begging. Says, no, what are you going to pay me for coming through my country? You know, so here's the clash of cultures and the interpretation of cultural events. When we spread things out on the ground, we call somebody up, come on up, you take a gift. That's what we do. See, and that is misinterpreted, because traders came and said, no, you have to bring me something, then I'll give you something. Completely different value system. And then they weren't willing to pay tolls either. So there's immediate conflict. And so from 1811, then the relationship very quickly started to deteriorate. Now, we did have some good relationship with some trappers and what they called in those days mountain men. You know, we had a good relationship with Joe Meek, I think Newell, Sublette, and a few others. Because we'd go to rendezvous with them, and then we'd have a good time. And so in some aspects, the relationship that we tried to set up did work, but overall it didn't. So these are the things I tried to explain. And, you know, there's other little stories. You know, there was another one. He became known as Chief Timothy, and he lived at the mouth of and up the Alpawai River. His Nez Perce name was Tumutsu. And Tumutsu was about 5, 6 years old when Lewis and Clark came. And they met Lewis and Clark at the mouth of El Poway Creek, which is in the state of Washington and just not too far downstream from Clarkston, Washington. And Chief Timothy remembered Sacagawea. And for some reason, he must have picked up on a name of Jane as being Sacagawea. And I think probably what occurred was that the Corps Discovery men called Sacagawea by a nickname which was Jane. I think that was probably where this name comes from. Well, when Chief Timothy became older and a leader of his people, then he named his daughter Jane. And she became known after a couple of marriages by Jane Silcott. And this little story is that Sacagawea did live to be an elderly lady, and other people say no, she died at Fort Manuel a few years later after the Corps discovery. Well, we have this little story of Sacagawea, that she became an older lady and that she did live in Wyoming. So Chief Timothy, hearing this, said, well, I'll send Jane to Wyoming to visit with and trade with Sacagawea. So that's what they did. And so to us, you know, Sacagawea did live to be an older lady. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that occurred with the Nez Perce people. And these stories come from some of our elders. So I can't ignore these stories. So I retell them. And it goes on and on. There's so much more misunderstandings, misinterpretation, and a class of cultures that occurred since 1806. It just goes on and on and on. Another instance is when Ordway went from Kamei to the Salmon River and Snake River. They didn't find any salmon to buy or purchase on the Salmon River at that time, and it was the last few days of May that they went. Lewis and Clark had heard that Chinook salmon were running up the rivers, but they hadn't gotten to the Clearwater or the Salmon River at that time. They were going up the main stem of the Snake River. So Ordway and Fraser and I can't recall a third one, but there were 3 of the Corps Discovery. And when they went down to the salmon, they couldn't find salmon there, so they rode over the ridge line, Wapshilai Ridge, which is just south of Winchester, Idaho, and they went over the ridge and into the Snake River. And they found a large village there. One village structure was about 150 feet long, and there was a large settlement of Nez Perces there. Well, they found salmon there, and they traded and purchased some salmon. And this is what they came after. So when they were packing up the next morning, they found that a few of their salmon were missing. And so Ordway, in his journal, he writes down, some of our salmon were stolen, but we came back and they delivered some salmon back to Lewis and Clark at Kamei. Most of the salmon spoiled, but they had a few that survived the trip, and they said that the salmon was very delicious. But here again is another misinterpretation of this event. In our culture, there is always what we call a salmon leader in each village. And he is the one that makes the decisions on when to fish, where to fish, and who gets to eat the first fish. Usually it's the young children. And they have either a ceremony or some kind of observance for the coming of the first salmon. So he has the responsibility to decide who gets the salmon, how it's distributed, and who it's given to. And that's his responsibility. Well, during the evening or the night prior to Ordway going back, some young men probably came and said, my family needs salmon. Where can I get salmon? So the salmon leader says, right there, you take that. Whatever you need, you take it, and you go. Well, in Ordway, he says, no, they were stolen. The salmon leader has the responsibility to distribute fish to anyone that needs fish. That's Nez Perce law in those days. So you cannot ignore Nez Perce law when you live in Nez Perce country. So these are the things that I'm trying to explain, that there's misinterpretation constantly throughout the events. For the last 200 years, it's been going on. And it's still here. There's still misunderstanding and misinterpretation of how we live and who we are. And it goes into jurisdictional disputes and all kinds of arenas. But our main interest is to provide for our people. Because we made the United States government put it in writing in 1855. And all we want to do is make the United States government live up to what they agreed to in 1855. Very simple, not complicated, but very complex to apply. So that's our dilemma even today. After 200 years of relationships, we still are in conflict over certain issues. And it continues. But one of the other things that the people prophesied was, one day we'll be one people when we stop killing ourselves and each other and trying to take away something from our neighbors or someone else and make it our own. That's when we become one people. And that's what the old people would talk about, and says we need to do that. So after 200 years, we're still trying to do that. We need to work towards that relationship of being one people. It's very meaningful, and we need to try to do that. So, I guess for now that's all I have to say. So if you have any questions or something, I'll sure try to answer you. Yes? The role of trappers. There was, well, one of the things that came out of Lewis Clark, Jurier, he was half Shawnee and half French. And he was a sign talker. He could, this is a sign for Indian sign talk. That's what that means. So he could do that. And we had a very good relationship with Jurier. And since we knew that he was half Shawnee and he knew the sign language, we communicated with him fairly well. In fact, I think he was given a gray horse because we recognized him as someone that had good knowledge of Indian people. And I think there was a couple other French-sounding names that may have had some Indian blood also on the expedition. So Jurier was well treated by us because he knew who he was. But unfortunately, he got killed, I believe, out on Yellowstone River just a few years later by the Blacklegs. So the relationship between these mixed bloods was very good. And I mentioned before that some early trappers and traders came out to Nez Perce country after 1806. And some of those we got on along with very well because they understood, or either because they were a mixed blood and they understood the Indian ways a lot better. And some of those came out. There was Reboynes, Sublets, Newell, Meek, and a number of trappers like that some were accepted right into our tribal organization. They married Nez Perce women. So the relationship with some was very good. But it's the governmental agents and BIA people and that we didn't get along with because it was take. So that relationship, in that respect, didn't work out very well. But it did in other aspects.
Thanks very much for your fine presentation. You touched.
I don't think your mic is on. There.
Thanks very much for that fine presentation. You touched on something that came up in a panel discussion I attended yesterday, that is the descendants of some of the Corps of Discovery. I'm wondering two things, a couple of things. One is you mentioned descendants of William Clark. Are you aware of any descendants, through tribal relations, of Meriwether Lewis? And secondly, one of the points that came up during the panel discussion yesterday over near Monticello was is there any interest within your people in exploring possible DNA evidence of those descendants? Thank you.
Okay. Was there any descendants of Lewis? As far as I know, there isn't. Now, there is some statement that I've seen that said that Lewis didn't participate in the other activities that Clark and Ordway and Cass and York also had with the native women. Now, I don't know the reason why. There's speculative things about it, but if you recall, there's controversy of how he ended his life. Was it himself or was he shot by somebody else? Well, that raises the question, what made his mind, deteriorate like that he would do that? Was it syphilis or something else? So, you can speculate on how that occurred, but as far as I know, there's no descendants of Lewis. There is descendants of York, though, among the Nez Perce. And if you can imagine, most of these men of the Corps of Discovery were probably the average age was just a little over 20. There were, I think, one or two that were still teenagers. And then, of course, the leaders were only about 30, 32, or 33 years old. So these are, young, vigorous men, and they viewed the native women as something different than the way I just described. We're trying to set up a good relationship with that. And arranged marriages with Nez Perce women did occur. So, and that's something that even some of our own people would like to ignore, but it did occur in those days. So, and DNA, I don't know whether it really served any purpose for us or not. I don't think it would. To become a member of the Nez Perce tribe, you have to have a certain blood quantum. Now, whether a Clark would want to be a member of the tribe, I don't know. But it's interesting. I bring this out because this relationship that we're trying to establish, so I don't know whether our people would accept DNA. I know it occurred with Jefferson's descendants, but you'd have to ask someone of black descendants to see how they reacted to that, because I have no idea how my people would react. Anything else?
Hi, Alan.
Hi.
This may be a repeat question, but I was, and you may have presented it earlier, but the one thing we've been working with the Nez Perce tribe on is trying to manage the Lewis and Clark Trail up on the Lola Trail, and that route itself is the historic Buffalo Road that the Nez Perce used for years and years and years, and then ended up being the Nez Perce flight path when Chief Joseph obviously was trying to flee the military. Do you think that, how do you think that we should be presenting the story of the Nez Perce in relationship to the Lewis and Clark story?
Well, I think it needs to be told that, the relationship that we tried to establish was for this agreement that we made with the medal, peace and friendship, that's what we wanted to continue. Well, it didn't work, in 1877. We went on the flight of 1877 through the corridor of Lewis and Clark, that trail, it's about 3 or 4 different trails. We call it the Buffalo Trail because we went east to the Buffalo country. And then when Lewis and Clark came, then it became known as Lewis and Clark Trail. But prior to that, it was known as the Lolo Trail, then the Birds Truax Trail in 1863 or something. So it's a combination of different roads and trails. And one of the things that the tribe is very concerned about is that we have some very significant sacred sites and cultural sites along that trail. It goes from Kamiah to near the mouth of Lolo Creek in Montana. So those things we want to see protected. And it could be just a rock pile, it could be just something under a stone, it could be a mound, it could be a mountain that has some kind of aesthetic or religious significance to us. Since it's public land, that presents a dilemma to us. How should that corridor be managed to protect the resources and the sites that we hold very dear? And it becomes a dilemma. Who do you need to tell where the specific site is? Does everybody need to know? No, I don't think so. Certain people need to know. The Forest Service people need to know where these sites are so they can go there and at least monitor the condition of that site. Is it still there? Has it been undisturbed? Is it going to exist longer? And it is becoming a dilemma because the budget cuts are here. There's not enough resource personnel to offer protection and oversight. And also our own Nez Perce people should be able to go into that area, utilize the site or the resource the way we did 200 years ago or even 300 years ago. There's still some of us that still practice this. And so it's important to us. And we don't want to see this resource desecrated or expired, out of existence, because we still use it. It's not that it's a particular site that it has a physical presence, but it's also this aesthetic value that we have. And because people don't see it, they don't think anything exists there. Our beliefs is that the earth is our mother and the sun is the father. Without these two elements and water being mixed together does not give you life. If you remove one of these elements, life will no longer exist. So it's very important to us. So we shouldn't be going out and utilizing a resource into expiration. And that's what we're afraid of. And I hope that we could come up with some kind of manual plan that would protect these resources. Yes, another question? Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for your attention.